So, I started reading about 2 years ago. When I was in high school, I didn't care much about reading at all. I didn't care about reading, or anything academic. And that was until a friend of mine recommended a classic book to me, Pilgrim's Progress, and it kind of changed my life. And I've started reading ever since. I got into other things, the classics, got into philosophy. But reading has been a huge source of knowledge, entertainment. It's been a huge source of comfort and guidance for me. I've solved a lot of my problems and figured out a lot of life choices and life paths through my reading, especially through my reading of biographies. I read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. That helped me a lot. I would definitely recommend it. Reading the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Not really a biography, but just his personal diary and thoughts. And yeah, it's helped me a lot. And today I want to talk about how the biography I'm reading now, American Prometheus, by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin, the biography of J. Robert Oppenheimer. I want to talk about how he cured his depression through reading. So a bit of background on Oppenheimer. He was an American physicist in the 20th century, and he's most famous for his work in the Manhattan Project and developing the atomic bomb in World War II. So, as the title suggests, there's a movie made about this by Christopher Nolan called Oppenheimer. It's pretty good, and it's based off of this biography. So, a bit more background. Oppenheimer went to Harvard University, he went to Cambridge, and he went to Göttingen. I'm probably saying that really wrong, but it's a school in Germany that was famous in the 20th century for quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and their discoveries there. So Oppenheimer was there as a 20-something, or late teens, 21, 22, and he didn't have many friends at the university. He was a loner. He kind of stayed in his room and read physics a lot, which is a good thing because that's where his love of physics came through his reading. He also didn't have many close friends, and he had a few close friends, which I'll talk about later. And he actually wasn't good at all his physics stuff, like his lab experiments. He was not good in the lab. Writing papers, he liked it, but he struggled to. He was pretty wordy. He would struggle to get to the point in his papers, and all those things combined. And he also didn't have much luck with women. Didn't have any really romantic relationships. There were a few girls that he kind of fell for certain times, but nothing serious. So all that put together, Oppenheimer fell into a depression while he was at Cambridge in 1925. So it got so bad, and this wasn't like a depression that we think of today. Just he was constantly sad. It was more. He was almost schizophrenic. His brain was like split in two. He was so distraught all the time. This was depicted in the movie. There was a time at Cambridge where he laced one of the apples on his professor's desk, and we don't know what he laced it with. It could have been poison, or it could have been something that just would have made the professor sick. But he laced one of the apples. I don't remember the situation, but that was the last straw. And when that happened, but he laced one of these apples, and when that happened, Cambridge told him he had to go to psychotherapy or else he was going to be expelled. So he goes to get treated for his extreme depression and these outbursts and these irrational behaviors. And he went for several months. And long story short, it didn't help him at all. He's a very smart man, and he knew that. And having to go see a psychiatrist and have someone else fix his problems was humiliating for him. So he himself got into psychotherapy And before that, just to show you how deep he was in this depression, another thing that fueled it was envy and jealousy. Now, those two words sound like they're the same thing, but I think there's a slight difference between envy and jealousy. Envy, according to Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, is when you feel pain or grief or sadness or even anger at the good of others. When something good happens to someone else, you're hurt by it, you're pained by it, simply put. And I know that sounds like, okay, what's the difference between that and jealousy? Jealousy is more when something that once belonged to you is taken or doesn't belong to you anymore or belongs to someone else. Usually that's a thing or a person. That's why people usually get jealous over past relationships when they find out that they moved on and now they're with someone else. They're jealous because that they were once theirs and now they're not. So one time, one of his close friends, I forget his name, he announced to Oppenheimer that he was getting engaged. And Oppenheimer, filled with envy and jealousy, sat there for a second, quiet, and then he erupted in his big violent fit. He attacked his friend. I don't know how far he went, but he hurt his friend, and his friend hurt him physically. And then they separated for a few months, and eventually they made up. But he was so filled with envy, one, that his friend had a romantic relationship, something that he wanted and he never found, which caused him to be bitter towards women. And he even wrote his little brother, giving him advice for school, saying, don't deal with girls. It's not a waste of time. You need to be doing bigger, better things. And jealous because this woman he saw, was someone who was going to take his best friend away from him. So he kept going to therapy and nothing was working. Until one day, he read a book. He got into psychotherapy and reading. And I'm going to quote from the biography. So one day as Oppenheimer's reading, he has this epiphany. And this is the moment where he lifted himself out of his depression through what he read. So I'm going to quote. So actually, what happened in Corsia? Probably nothing. Oppenheimer deliberately answered Davis's query about Corsia with an enigma sure to frustrate his biographers. He coyly called it love, and not a mere love affair. Obviously, the distinction was important to him. In the company of his friends, he had no opportunity for a real affair, but he did read a book that appears to have resulted in an epiphany. The book was Marcel Proust's À la recherche du temps perdu, a mystical and existential text that spoke to Oppenheimer's troubled soul. Reading it in the evening by flashlight during his walking tour of Corsia, he later claimed to his Berkeley friend his friend Hakan Chevalier, was one of the great experiences of his life. It snapped him out of his depression. Proust's work is a classic novel of introspection, and it left a deep and lasting impression on Oppenheimer. More than a decade later, after he first read it, Oppenheimer startled Chevalier by quoting from memory a passage in Volume 1 that discusses cruelty. Now, I'm not going to quote the entire passage because it's kind of long, but basically in this passage, in Proust's novel, there's this girl who is burdened because she doesn't feel, she's indifferent to the suffering of others. And she notices that there's a bit of evil inside everyone. And Oppenheimer, apparently added on with all the other stuff, felt an indifference to people's suffering. And that caused him to feel a lot of guilt and shame. And in reading this novel, he was able to see himself in these characters, and that he felt a bit of comfort that he's not alone in being indifferent towards others' suffering or having that evil side. He wasn't alone in that. And for some people, seeing that in a novel or a film or some kind of show, it's enough And it obviously was for him, but it is enough to lift you out of, self-pity and your guilt. Because, yeah, it's true. Everyone has a bit of evil inside of them. So that was how Oppenheimer, he came out of his depression after that. And he no longer had to go to see the psychotherapists and psychoanalysts. And, of course, he was a bit proud of himself because he could say that it was not a psychotherapist, but it was a book that brought him out of his depression. So why am I talking about that? I thought it was interesting because, like I mentioned earlier, reading's taught me a lot. It's given me a lot of guidance on paths I should choose in life, paths that I shouldn't choose. And it's led me, along with reading and writing paired, have led me to understanding things about myself and being comfortable and knowing my faults. And that allows me to be more confident in my strengths when I'm well acquainted with my faults. And seeing that in characters, for me, like Oppenheimer, allowed me to, not feel so alone in that either. So the encouragement, that's all to say, keep reading. I had the realization that the more I read, if I keep reading, even if I feel lost, I'll always be able to find my way if I just keep reading. So Oppenheimer knew that too, and he solved his depression. So, thanks for watching. I run a Substack called Student of Life. It's the same as this YouTube channel, where I write about stuff like topics like this, about like philosophy, literature, writing. I haven't posted on there in a few months, but I'm going to start posting really soon. All my content's free. And if you really want to support me, you can subscribe on YouTube for sure, but then really go check out the Substack, read what I have, see if you like it. And if you do and you want to support me, $5 a month subscription on Substack. That's literally the lowest I could pull it down to $5. I'd really appreciate it. And you should be hearing from me again very soon.